Mr. Lawrence Wilson was the most extraordinary teacher I'd ever encountered during my time at Westridge Secondary School. Serving as my year coordinator throughout all 5 years, he also taught me history in year 9. Before his class, I had virtually no interest in history or any humanities subjects. In fact, I'd been moved down a class at the end of year 8, my declining grades reflecting my waning enthusiasm over those 12 months. I wasn't a troublemaker by any definition, just perpetually lost in daydreams. Many teachers seem to lack genuine passion for their subjects, their voices droning on like monotonous background noise, while their evident boredom spread to me like a contagion. Soon enough, I'd drift away into teenage fantasies. The humanities teachers from year 8 had been particularly uninspiring, making my mental escapes inevitable. Mr. Wilson's teaching style made disengaging impossible. In his mid-50s and a fixture at Westridge, he wasn't particularly tall, yet even the largest students in year 11 regarded him with a mixture of respect and fear. He possessed a fearless, commanding presence that filled every classroom he entered, combining the confidence of a seasoned adult with the vibrant energy of someone decades younger. I watched in amazement as this whirlwind of enthusiasm strode across the front of the classroom, his voice rising and falling with such precision that every piece of information imprinted itself permanently in my mind. Ancient civilizations, medieval Europe, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, world wars. Throughout that year, I absorbed everything eagerly. I never discovered if Mr. Wilson himself had any particular historical passion, but he always spoke with genuine respect about each period we studied, emphasizing how understanding history demanded discipline, commitment, and self-respect. By year's end, I achieved the highest mark in the final exam, an astonishing 96%. My newfound enthusiasm had spread to other subjects, reflected in steadily improving grades and glowing teacher reports. I attribute this transformation entirely to Mr. Wilson. Near the end of that academic year, after covering major historical periods, we discussed the more general topic of historical documentation and eyewitness accounts, which led briefly to a mention of historical hauntings. Mr. Wilson rarely allowed tangents. He preferred maintaining laser focus on curriculum topics unless a diversion could genuinely enhance our understanding before returning to the main subject. During the question period that day, one boy asked, "Have you ever experienced anything supernatural, sir?" I had grown so accustomed to Mr. Wilson's sharp, direct manner that I immediately detected the subtle unease in his voice as he answered quietly. "I didn't when I was your age, but then I experienced something." Silence. The class always gave him their complete attention, but now that attention intensified tenfold, and the unspoken request to hear more filled the room like an invisible presence. Mr. Wilson would never indulge such curiosity merely to stroke his ego or to entertain teenagers who should be focused on history. But with all the required material covered, our test results exceeding expectations, and the class firmly under his guidance, he rewarded us with the following story. When I was 14, my school organized a residential trip to Blackwood Ridge in the North Country. Back then, schools were often gender segregated, so our group consisted of roughly 30 boys and 3 teachers staying at a lodge outside the small village of Oakvale. We arrived on a Monday morning in mid-February for 5 days of hiking. For most of us, it represented our first time away from home. The weather wasn't terrible, but certainly wasn't ideal either. Heavy rainfall the previous week had left the area shrouded in a persistent gray mist. Despite these dreary conditions, our spirits remained high as we anticipated our adventure. We were the final group scheduled at the lodge before its temporary closure for renovations. We occupied the entire second floor, while the third floor had already been emptied and cleaned in preparation. The first floor primarily contained staff quarters, supply closets, and laundry facilities, while the ground floor housed meeting rooms and the kitchen and dining areas. The staff numbered perhaps 10 in total, overseen by the head caretaker, a kindly man with a round face named Mr. Fletcher. He and his friendly golden retriever, Amber, were the only permanent residents. Due to an odd number of boys in our group and rooms designed for 2, I ended up with a room to myself, a single bedroom situated precisely in the center of the second-floor corridor. I never learned how they decided I would get this room, but I assume it was because I was self-sufficient and wouldn't complain about the arrangement, which I didn't. The room contained only a bed, a basin, a wardrobe, and a nightstand with drawers. A small window overlooked the misty grounds below. Though Spartan, we didn't expect to spend much time indoors anyway, so it felt cozy enough. I unpacked and settled in quickly that first morning. On our first day, we hiked about 5 miles up and around Blackwood Peak, a hill in the heart of the valley. Being teenage boys, we laughed at the countless animal droppings and playfully teased those struggling up the incline before pausing at the summit to catch our breath and admire the spectacular view, though everything remained veiled in mist. The kitchen staff had provided paper lunch bags with cheese sandwiches, potato chips, and a cookie. We found a comfortable spot to eat before making the long walk back to the lodge. Upon return, we enjoyed tea and biscuits before showering and changing into clean clothes. Before dinner, we received notebooks and instructions to begin a travel journal. This simple, relaxing activity allowed us the freedom to write while chatting, sprawled across sofas, lounging on the wide staircases, or sitting at conference tables. A welcome change from rigid classroom desks. The only notable incident that day involved one of our teachers, Mr. Thorne, twisting his right ankle during our descent from Blackwood Peak. Discomfort and frustration were evident on his face as he clearly suppressed the urge to curse while limping alongside us. Most of us mentioned his misfortune in our journals, careful not to portray it too humorously. After dinner, we had 2 hours of free time for reading, playing quiet board games, or writing letters home. At 9:30 p.m., we were sent to our rooms, and at 10 p.m., our teachers patrolled the corridor to ensure we were prepared for bed with lights out. I recognized Mr. Thorne's limping gait as he passed my door. I settled quickly into darkness. I imagined the other boys lying awake, whispering and quietly laughing together as they drifted off. Though slightly envious of having no one to share midnight giggles with, I consoled myself with the thought that I'd probably fall asleep sooner and feel more refreshed the next morning. That first day had been enjoyable but exhausting, and I was definitely ready for sleep. I'm certain we all were. Soon I was deeply asleep. Some might dismiss what happened next as merely a dream, but I know what I saw, and it remains as vivid now as you all appear before me today. I don't know what time it was when my eyes opened, but darkness still enveloped the world outside. I also can't explain why I awoke at all. Both my room and the corridor remained silent, and I'd been sleeping so profoundly that the mild creaking of settling furniture wouldn't have roused me. I had been completely unconscious, and I can only assume that some instinct sensed an impending event. A cold presence permeated the room, beyond the typical nighttime temperature drop. From the wardrobe emerged a figure carrying a pillow. The wardrobe doors remained closed. I inhaled sharply. Instantly, paralyzing fear overwhelmed my entire body. The back of my head remained pressed hard against the wall beside my bed. The rest of my body turned to stone. I literally couldn't lift or even feel my limbs. I watched as the figure moved steadily toward me. Though unhurried, the distance from wardrobe to bed was short, and I had no time to observe any details about their clothing. All I saw was a calm, expressionless face in the darkness. The figure stood over me, placed the pillow over my face, then lowered it. I don't recall blinking or closing my eyes, but in an instant, the figure vanished. I realized then that I was drenched in sweat. Honestly, had I walked fully clothed into a shower at that moment, I wouldn't have noticed any difference. The only sensation I remember feeling was intense cold, bone-chilling, penetrating cold. For long seconds, I gasped desperately for breath. I don't think I slept at all for the remainder of that night. The sweat had dried against my skin, but a lingering chill persisted, and even under the blanket, I couldn't get warm. Perhaps I dozed momentarily, drifting in and out of consciousness for brief intervals, but mostly I remained awake, paralyzed with terror. Without question, it was the worst night's sleep I've ever experienced. As the first rays of dawn filtered through my window, I finally felt able to move my heavy limbs and leave my bed. We were supposed to remain in our rooms until called for breakfast, but sleep deprivation had left me nearly delirious. I couldn't process rules or instructions. I left my room and headed downstairs to the lodge entrance without considering what I might say if questioned. The only person in the entrance hall at that early hour was Mr. Fletcher. He sat in an armchair near the fireplace, quietly reading while Amber lay contentedly at his feet. As I slowly descended the stairs, I found reassurance in this tranquil scene, the warm colors of the fire already making me feel safer and less chilled. Mr. Fletcher looked up from his book. His eyes met mine, which I'm sure were bloodshot from insomnia, stark against my pale complexion. My awkward posture and trembling movements clearly indicated exhaustion. Then he actually said it. "Good heavens, young man, you look like you've seen a spirit." I responded with simple honesty. "I think I have." The frailty in my voice didn't surprise me, but Mr. Fletcher's face immediately showed concern. He set down his book, stood, and approached me. He placed his hand against my forehead, then rested it on my shoulder and calmly said, "It's all right, lad. Come along with me." As he guided me toward the kitchen, his gentle manner and soothing tone made me want to embrace his reassuring presence, both for comfort and simply to remain upright. Amber followed, tail wagging. Inside, kitchen staff were busy accepting a delivery at the double doors and preparing to start breakfast. They didn't seem to notice us as Mr. Fletcher pulled up a stool for me, then filled a kettle at one of the sinks and placed it on a burner. I briefly wondered if someone might object to a dog in the kitchen, but no one did. Heat radiating from nearby ovens finally stopped my shivering. "What's your name, lad?" he asked. "Lawrence Wilson," I replied. "Right, Lawrence. I'll make us both some tea, and you can tell me everything." I sat quietly as the kettle boiled while Mr. Fletcher retrieved 2 cups and asked about milk and sugar. He placed my drink on the counter beside me and sat opposite without speaking. Clearly, he intended to let me talk at my own pace without pressure or judgment. Feeling safe in his presence, I described what I'd seen. Throughout my account, he never interrupted or asked for clarification. He simply listened attentively until I finished. Amber sat beside him the entire time, appearing equally interested. In the brief silence that followed, I sipped my tea and wondered if he believed me, thought I was lying, or believed I was sincere but had experienced a dream or hallucination. A small part of me even considered, perhaps hoped, that as head caretaker, he might have encountered the apparition himself. "Which room was this, Lawrence? Your roommate didn't see anything." "I have a room to myself, sir, in the middle of the corridor." "Oh, I see." I noticed how this information subtly changed his tone. I felt certain he would say more, but just then we heard the other boys and teachers making their way downstairs. As they filed into the kitchen, all washed and dressed while I sat in pajamas, probably looking utterly miserable, Mr. Fletcher approached Mr. Thorne, who still favored one foot. I couldn't hear their conversation, but their concerned expressions were unmistakable. They both came to speak with me, and Mr. Thorne spoke first. "Are you all right, Lawrence? Mr. Fletcher mentioned what you believe you saw last night. Do you feel up to hiking today?" He clearly wouldn't entertain the concept of a ghost, perhaps to avoid frightening the other boys or simply because he didn't believe it, but he seemed genuinely concerned about my obvious lack of sleep, regardless of the cause. "I think I'm okay, sir. I believe I can manage the hike." "Very well, if you're certain. I'm staying here today to rest my ankle. Mr. Bennett and Mr. Hamilton will take the group out. If you decide you'd rather remain here, that option is available. Why don't you get dressed, have breakfast, and we'll assess how you're feeling then?" I nodded in response. Mr. Thorne turned to Mr. Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher, would you mind escorting Lawrence back to his room so he can prepare for the day?" Mr. Fletcher nodded. "And is another room available where he might sleep for the remainder of our stay?" "I'm sure there is. I'll see what I can arrange, sir," Mr. Fletcher replied. He once again placed his hand gently on my shoulder and said, "Come along, lad. Everything will be fine." As we left the dining area, I felt the other boys watching me. I assume one of them had overheard Mr. Fletcher speaking with Mr. Thorne, and I had clearly become the primary topic of breakfast conversation. even with teachers politely but firmly discouraging speculation and conversations conducted in hushed tones. I'm certain I heard the word ghost circulating. We climbed the stairs from the entrance hall to the second-floor corridor. Even with Mr. Fletcher's solid, reassuring presence, I felt uneasy approaching my room. This lodge has stood for over 150 years, so there's no telling what secrets it holds. I discover something new about it nearly every week. How long have you been caretaker, Mr. Fletcher? Just over 12 years, lad, but I was the groundskeeper before that, and when I was your age, I helped in the kitchen, washing dishes, mopping floors, and such. Been here almost 30 years now. I took a deep breath as Mr. Fletcher turned the handle and opened the door for me. The room appeared exactly as I'd left it. Mr. Fletcher asked permission to enter before I changed clothes, which surprised me coming from an adult, but I granted it. He approached the wardrobe, opened its doors, and examined the interior. Ah yes, when you mentioned having this room, I wondered. I watched curiously as he closed the wardrobe doors, positioned his fingers carefully behind it, and shifted it several inches to the left. Yes, there it is, he murmured. I couldn't determine what he'd found or what I should be observing. He ran his fingers along the section of wall where the wardrobe had stood. Come here, Lawrence. Feel this. Hesitantly, I approached, and he gently took my wrist. He guided my hand to the wall, and with my fingertips, I detected a slight but definite indentation beneath the wallpaper, extending the entire height of where the wardrobe had been. Not understanding what he was showing me, I must have looked confused. There used to be a connecting door here. This room was joined to the adjacent one. It's been sealed off now, but what you're feeling is where the old frame was installed. I found this fascinating. Whatever you witnessed last night might have entered through there in an earlier time, when it was still alive. You mentioned it carried a pillow? Couldn't believe it. Mr. Fletcher actually believed me. Yes, sir. And placed it over your head? I noted his shift from it to he. Yes, sir. I suspect something tragic occurred here once. His matter-of-fact delivery provided little comfort, and Mr. Fletcher sensed this. All right, lad. I'll wait outside while you dress. Once finished, pack your belongings, and I'll relocate you to a room on the first floor. We won't have you spending another night in here. He stepped out, and I followed his instructions. Knowing he waited just outside, I neither panicked nor rushed as I washed, brushed my teeth, and dressed. I packed my things and followed him downstairs to an empty single room. He explained it was normally staff quarters, but with reduced staffing due to the upcoming renovation, it remained vacant and would be mine for the remainder of our stay. He added reassuringly that his own room was at the corridor's end and he'd be available anytime, day or night. I joined the other boys downstairs, who had finished eating and were donning hiking boots and thick jackets. Suddenly ravenous, I devoured a substantial breakfast of toast, eggs, beans, and sausages. I felt revitalized, not just from the abundant food, but also from Mr. Fletcher's understanding and knowing I wouldn't spend another night in that bedroom. With all boys assembled, Mr. Bennett asked if I still planned to join the day's hike, and between mouthfuls, I confirmed enthusiastically. He seemed pleased but advised me to eat more slowly. Following his suggestion, I finished my meal, put on my hiking boots, and joined the other boys who had been chatting while waiting patiently. Mr. Thorne waved us off before settling in the entrance hall where I'd earlier encountered Mr. Fletcher, who was now tending the grounds. Amber hadn't accompanied him. Instead, she reclaimed her position by the fire, now near Mr. Thorne's feet. The other boys bombarded me with questions as we once again ventured into the mist. Our two teachers quickly silenced their persistent interrogation, but throughout the day, my classmates seized every opportunity to ask about what I'd seen or thought I'd seen. Some showed genuine fascination, others remained skeptical, but each had an opinion, and most requested additional details. Answers to questions I simply didn't have because the encounter had happened so quickly. Just as Mr. Fletcher had implied a tragedy in that bedroom's past, the boys reached similar conclusions from the information I'd shared. Exhausted and distracted by their endless questions and comments, I only much later that week recalled one boy saying, "I wonder who the victim was," and another adding, "Perhaps her spirit lingers there as well." Why he assumed the victim was female, I couldn't say, but as mentioned, I didn't even consider these comments until days later. By then, we would be heading home that evening. Mr. Wilson paused. A girl in class raised her hand, and he nodded for her to speak. "I thought you said you were there for 5 days, sir?" That was the plan. We sat dumbfounded. Clearly, the story wasn't finished. "What happened next?" a boy asked. Normally, this would earn a reprimand for speaking without permission, but as the classroom remained perfectly orderly, Mr. Wilson continued. "I spent the rest of that day hiking with my group. This time we explored Raven's Crest. It was another long, tiring, but enjoyable hike. I remember that day's sandwiches were awful. Some kind of unpleasant paste, unlike the thick slices of cheese we'd enjoyed the previous day. Most of us barely touched them, leaving us famished upon returning to the lodge." He paused again. I can't speak for my classmates, but I was so completely engaged in his story that despite the summer heat, I shivered slightly as if I joined him in that February mist. When we returned, Mr. Thorne immediately consulted with Mr. Bennett and Mr. Hamilton. We had no idea about what, but after our evening meal, we were summoned to a meeting room where Mr. Thorne announced we should pack our belongings because we were returning home. Our parents had already been notified and would receive refunds for the remaining days. "Did he explain why?" asked the same boy. This time, Mr. Wilson did correct him, politely but firmly. "Remember to raise your hand before speaking." And yes, he did explain. We exchanged bewildered glances before returning our attention to Mr. Wilson, who continued his account. After our departure for the day's hike, Mr. Thorne removed his right shoe and sock to examine his ankle. The swelling had decreased, but an ugly purple-black bruise now extended above his heel. He massaged it uselessly before replacing his sock, but not his shoe. Amber's ears perked up curiously, and Mr. Thorne patted her head as they both enjoyed the fire's warmth. Yesterday's newspaper lay on a nearby side table. Likely his only distraction during the monotonous hours ahead, he wasn't eager to begin reading it. He hoped no one had attempted the crossword, as that would certainly occupy him longer than whatever celebrity gossip dominated the headlines. He sighed deeply while watching the dog sprawl before the fire. Promised to be a very long day. He heard footsteps from one of the upper floors. This didn't immediately concern him, assuming housekeeping staff were performing their duties. He certainly wouldn't entertain the notion of the ghost I'd claimed to have seen the previous night. He replaced his shoe and was about to examine the newspaper when he remembered that due to the lodge's imminent closure, only minimal staff remained, and rooms were cleaned every other day, with the next cleaning scheduled for tomorrow. He'd watched the few kitchen staff depart after wiping down tables, and they wouldn't return until 4 p.m. That left only Mr. Fletcher, visible through the front window tending to shrubbery. "Blast!" he muttered aloud. It might be one of the boys. In his discomfort, he'd rushed the morning head count. Though he still considered a staff member more likely, he'd better investigate. He couldn't risk leaving a confused youngster wondering where everyone had gone, and besides, he had plenty of time to fill. As if anticipating Mr. Thorne's movement, Amber looked up from her mat. "Come along, girl," Mr. Thorne said. "Keep me company." He proceeded down the ground floor corridor, deliberately avoiding the first staircase. Determined to conduct a thorough check while getting some exercise, he moved with short, pained steps as Amber followed. The ground floor stood completely empty and silent. Even Amber's soft paw steps were audible, as were the footsteps from upstairs, their rhythm and volume becoming increasingly erratic. He climbed the staircase at the corridor's end to the first floor, with Amber now visibly excited for attention and bounding ahead. The first floor appeared equally deserted. Before him stretched an immaculate corridor with patterned hexagonal wallpaper and deep green carpeting. Small landscape paintings hung at intervals. He began by knocking gently on the first few doors, trying each handle and finding them all locked. Attempting each one seemed pointless. The footsteps clearly originated from the second floor, so he headed toward the next staircase. From above came a loud thump, an angry-sounding stomp. Mr. Thorne froze. Amber barked in response, and Mr. Thorne quieted her. Continuing toward the staircase, he heard another loud stomp, then another. Was the student misbehaving? Had they heard his door knocking on this floor and were now mocking him by stomping in response? Recalling my conversation with Mr. Fletcher, he shivered slightly. He tried dismissing it. Someone definitely occupied the upper floor, an actual person, not some apparition. Perhaps someone had dropped something? Maybe renovations had started early, and the noise was hammering? But it resembled neither of those sounds, and if renovations began prematurely, they surely wouldn't start on the only occupied floor. Now at the staircase base, he ascended the first flight and turned. At the top of the next flight, to the left, opened the second-floor corridor. "Hello?" he called, disappointed by the weakness in his voice. Genuine nervousness had overtaken him. The stomping footsteps approached. Any moment would reveal their source. He could barely stand it. His heart pounded as he gripped the banister, turning to retreat downstairs. Then the stomping ceased. Whoever it was had apparently marched furiously to the corridor's end, but now refused to advance further. Mr. Thorne stood frozen on the stairs, looking upward, unable to move either direction. "Hello?" he repeated, forcing a firmer tone. No response followed. Taking a deep breath, he slowly continued upward. This gave Amber all necessary encouragement. She bounded ahead, reached the staircase top, peered down the corridor, and stopped dead, and urinated in fear. "Amber," Mr. Thorne whispered, all confidence drained from his voice. "Amber?" he tried again. The dog didn't hear him, couldn't hear him. Her gaze remained locked on whatever occupied the corridor, her labored breathing punctuated by low whimpers. "Amber!" he gasped helplessly. Though intended as a command, the dog remained frozen in place. His own breathing had become frantic. What terrified the dog so completely? He didn't want to discover the answer. In one swift movement, he reached the stairs top with his back against the wall, stepping out with his back toward whatever held Amber's attention, refusing to face it. He grabbed her collar before rushing downstairs. Yes, he ran. Despite his painful ankle, he ran. During that brief moment he'd entered the corridor mouth, he knew whatever stood there was directly behind him. He had felt its freezing, deathly breath against his neck. As he fled, dragging the dog's limp body effortlessly in his fear-induced adrenaline state, he heard laughter from above. Terrible, terrible laughter. The unmistakable sound of a woman's voice. Once again, silence dominated the classroom. Mr. Wilson sat at his desk, gazing quietly at the floor, his typically vibrant demeanor now subdued yet dignified. He looked up as if inviting questions, and aware the lesson would soon end, I slowly raised my hand. He acknowledged with a nod in my direction. "Did you discover anything about the spirits? About why the lodge was haunted?" I realized immediately I'd accepted everything without question. Mr. Wilson had delivered his account with such conviction that I never considered it might be a child's hallucination, an exaggerated event, or even complete fiction. "Yes, I did," he began. "I learned much later that a tragedy had occurred at the lodge many years before. The caretaker at that time had suffocated his wife with a pillow. They'd had a violent argument in the entrance hall, and when she fled to an upstairs room and locked herself inside, he accessed it through the connecting door that was later sealed off. I believe I witnessed his spirit, and I assume Mr. Thorne encountered his wife's ghost." A girl sitting directly behind me raised her hand. With the bell imminent, this would be the final question. Mr. Wilson looked at her and simply said, "Yes." "What was the name of the lodge?" Mr. Wilson considered briefly before replying with a slight smile. "That I won't reveal." The class erupted in disappointed protests of, "Oh, sir, please tell us." Seconds later, the bell rang, and we were dismissed. I've never forgotten Mr. Wilson's ghost story and have thought about it often since, though I've never attempted to learn the lodge's name or the identities of the spirits haunting it. Part of me prefers not knowing, I loved his story so deeply that I hesitate to risk discovering it might be completely fictional. I later qualified as a teacher myself with my first position at my former school. Mr. Wilson had retired before my arrival. I have no idea where he is today or if he's still living. During my 5 years teaching there, I occupied the same classroom where he'd shared his story. Each Halloween, I would recount it to my own students as a reward for good behavior and achievement, and it never failed to captivate them. Now approaching my 50s, I believe allowing his story to fade into obscurity would be criminal. Transcribing and sharing it freely represents my small tribute to a remarkable teacher and storyteller. I hope my memory has preserved every detail accurately, and I trust he would approve of my retelling.